coming up here in a couple of weeks. And I want to invite you, those of you that have never been through Church 101, to come. And the reason why I want you to come to Church 101 is we don't have membership here, but we want you to belong to the family. And this is a class that will teach you about the vision, the values, and the practices, and why we do the things that we do around here. And so it's really about belonging. And if you feel like Vineyard is your home church, then this is a class that you really need to participate in to start your pathway in to the core of the church. I know even sounding like that or even talking like that scares some of you. And you just need to get over your scare and get on with your journey and get in the family that God's called you to, whether that's here or some other place. And we get the question too, can I go through Church 101 and 201 in the same day? And the answer to that is no. Because Cheryl and I take all your time in 101, and actually they take all their time for the people that are going through 201. And in 201 we teach you the 5 habits that are necessary for any follower of Jesus. And then after you graduate from 201, you can go right into 301 the following week. And that's where you learn about your gifts and your passions. And you know, you were not called into the family of God just to sit and take up a chair. No amens on that, but that is really true. You have gifts, and God expects you to employ those gifts in His family. And so we're going to teach you about your gifts and your callings and then try and place you. As a matter of fact, the people that go through Church 301, we have a 90% placement rate. So we used to call, I think maybe we still do call it, get it in gear. That's a good word, get it in gear. And besides that, we provide a dinner. Feed them and they will come. And around here, manna is pizza. So you come and get a pizza dinner, okay? So anyway, think about that. Sign up out in the lobby and we'd love to have you. Turn in your Bibles to Genesis chapter 37. And we're going to continue our series on seasons of the heart. And today we want to talk about navigating the winter season. Aren't you glad you came this morning? The winter season, navigating the winter season. I don't know what thoughts go through your mind when you hear the word winter, but let me give you some of mine. Cold, miserable, dead car batteries, which usually means there are dead cars around. Cold hands. Cold feet, traffic accidents. It amazes me, being raised in Colorado all my life, that a lot of people now that move up here seem to drive at the same rate of speed when there is snow on the pavement as when it is dry. And that is not a very wise thing to do, because you're going to wreck. Those people that just spoke were natives. Okay? Individuals who do not believe in black ice. Some of you are thinking right now, what kind of a wicked drink is he talking about? And that black ice is that stuff that's out there that looks like pavement, but it's really ice. And you don't believe in that stuff, and you go through it, and your car does about 2 or 3 whoop-de-doos, and your heart goes, woo, now I know what black ice is. And the next time you start to approach that, you get out of your car, put your car on a leash, and walk it through the black ice because it scares you so badly. Now, these are some of my thoughts about winter when that approaches my mind. Frozen water pipes. Counting the days until spring. Jealous of people who take vacations to warm destinations. Wondering about people who say they love winter and what therapist I could recommend for them. I'm just kind of joking there, but anyway. Winter isn't all bad. Beautiful snow-covered mountains, winter sports, cozy fires, hot chocolate, and good hot chili. You knew food was going to get in there some way, didn't you? All right? But most individuals enjoy warmer months versus the colder ones. And to prove my point, how many potential retirees from Florida do you know who are planning to move to Minot, North Dakota when they retire? Not very many, but if you go to Minot, North Dakota and ask them how many of you are planning on your retirement to go to Florida, a lot of those people would say yes. If there were any possible ways to avoid the winter months, most of us would probably try. We'd try to get out of it. That avoidance mechanism we have will not work when it comes to trying to turn around the winter months of our hearts. All of us are going to go through months of winter. And there's nothing in the world that you can do about it. There's a reason why God has 4 seasons. And it doesn't matter if you live in a warm climate or not, you're going to go through winter seasons of the heart. Winter, from a spiritual perspective, is times when we think that God has forsaken us. As a matter of fact, there's books in the Bible that are called wintry Bible books. I'll get it here in a minute. And the reason for that is because God simply knows that we need to understand as followers of Jesus that there are going to be times that we're going to go through winter months. As a matter of fact, I was talking to some friends last night, and he says, how long do these seasons last? Which is really a good question because nobody really knows how long they last. As a matter of fact, my life has been in the Psalms lately, and I've just been poring over David's life. And actually, you can see all 4 seasons in one chapter in David's life. And it's like you can go through them quickly or you can be there for a long time. But here's one that David is going through, and I want you to listen to this. Now, this is a man of God that knows God, but he is going through the winter times of his heart. And he's wondering, God, are you around? Are you here during these times? Listen to this. Psalms 38, 1-11. Don't turn there, just listen. O Lord, do not rebuke me in your anger or discipline me in your wrath. For your arrows have pierced me. Your hand has come down upon me. Because of your wrath there is no health in my body. My bones have no soundness because of sin. My guilt has overwhelmed me like a burden too heavy to bear. My wounds fester and are loathsome because of my sinful folly. I am bowed down and brought very low. All day long I go about mourning. My back is filled with searing pain. There is no health in my body. I am feeble and utterly crushed. I groan in anguish of my heart. All my longings lie open before you. O Lord, my sighing is not hidden from you. My heart pounds. My strength fails me. Even the light has gone from my eyes. My friends and companions avoid me because of the wounds. My neighbors stay far away. People do not like to be around depressed people. And they're saying, David is going through it, and David is watching this and saying, even my friends don't want to be around me. I'm in winter time of my life, and I need to know that you're around. Some of you are entering the winter months of your heart due to a lot of different reasons. Maybe a failed marriage. And winter has got you by the grip, and it's just taken you someplace where you never really thought you would be going. Maybe it was a failed business. Maybe it's a failure in your finances. Whatever the case, you recognize at this point that there is a winter in your heart. Others of you have been dealt a blow by a disease. Sitting across the desk from a doctor, and he says, I'm sorry, but this is what you've got. Whether it's fatal or not. And maybe it's a member of your family, and now you're beginning to realize, boy, my whole life is just now beginning to really change. And you're going through a process in your life, and you're wondering where God is. Winter months of the heart can be described as believing that God has forsaken you. Listen to David again in Psalms 88, 13-14. But I cry to you for help. O Lord, my prayer comes before you. Why, O Lord, do you reject me and hide your face from me? You feel like when you're going through the winter months of your heart, you feel like God has forsaken you. You can't find God. Where are you, God? What's going on in my life? And here's something I just want to preface before we even get into the notes this morning. I want you to know the best description that I have of a carnal Christian is somebody that goes by their feelings rather than what they know is true. Which means that lots of times during these winter months that we don't feel God, or He's not as close as we think that He is, but we do have this promise that He says He will never leave us nor forsake us, that we can always believe what His Word says rather than what our feelings are. And we have to remember that as we're going through this process here, even though it's the winter times of our months, winter times of our hearts, God is actually going to do something that he couldn't do without that season in your life. See? There's reasons for the seasons, and God is going to make himself real during that season. The most difficult portion of winter of heart seems, again, that we can't find God. Joseph will be dealing with the winter of his heart, and again, we can learn from his life. So if you'll turn, if you've already turned there, Genesis chapter 37, verse 19. And this is his brother speaking. If you weren't here last week, you go back and read the first part of this chapter and get an idea of what's going on in Joseph's life. But his brothers are not real thrilled with the dreams that he's had, because he's telling them that I'm going to become the leader of you. And he's the youngest. You know what happens to younger brothers? They always get beat up. Who does this dreamer think that he is? And that's basically what we start out with in verse 19. Here comes that dreamer. They said to each other, come, now let's kill him and throw him in to one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. And when Reuben, which is his brother, heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. Let's not take his life, he said. Don't shed any blood. Throw him into cistern here in the desert, but don't lay a hand on him. And Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the richly ornamented robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. Now the cistern was empty, and there was no water in it. And as they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. And their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. And Judah said to his brothers, what will we gain if we kill our brothers and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood. His brothers agreed. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. And when Reuben returned to the cistern and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes. And he went back to his brothers and said, the boy isn't there. Where can I turn now? Then they got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in blood. They took the ornamented robe back to their father and said, we found this. Examine it and see whether it is your son's robe. He recognized it and said, it is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. No, he said, in mourning will I go down to the grave. And I want you to notice those words. In mourning will I go down to the grave, to my son. So his father wept for him, and meanwhile the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. If you have your little outlines, you want to follow along this morning, let's take a look at 5 truths regarding winter. 5 truths regarding winter. Number 1 is this: we're not in control when we're in winter. We realize we are not in control. Listen to this in verses 19 and 20. Here comes that dreamer, they said to each other. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say, a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we will see what happens of his dreams. I wonder how Joseph actually processed what was actually happening to him. Because see, he's the dreamer. He's the one that's saying, hey guys, I've got some really good news. And this is where my life is going. Sorry about yours. Your life is hurting right now, but mine is going, I'm upward and mobile, and there's not a thing in the world you can do about it. And I'm reading into the text there, but I think there's probably some kind of that attitude that was going on. And so he's probably thinking these kind of thoughts. Boy, if my brothers can see me when I get to that place of leadership. Man, are they going to be jealous. I mean, I'm going to have my penthouse apartment and my new Porsche. And they're just going to be all sorts of jealous because of where I'm going. Now, his brothers grab him and strip him of his robe. And he's probably thinking, what in the world is going on here? I thought my life was going this direction. God, I thought I heard from you. I thought that dream was from you. I thought I was going in a certain direction, and now you're putting me in a cistern. What is going on in my life? Have you ever had the Lord show you something about your life, and then it seems like you are going in 180 degrees in the opposite direction of where you thought you were going? It's just amazing how God starts out the process of what He's going to do in your life, and yet He shows you something, and we talked about that last week, about the future, and yet it seems like we are going just in the opposite direction. And I think a lot of this is just simply because, whether it's American culture or any culture, every human being actually has this belief at some point or another, I'm in control of my own life. And probably in our society more than other, we really talk about that, my destiny is within my own hands. I just want to laugh. People say that. As a matter of fact, none of us are assured of the next heartbeat. And that doesn't mean that God goes around killing people. It just means that there are physical laws, and our bodies are broken, and sometimes they just fall apart early. And there's not a thing in the world anybody can do about it. You see? And yet there's this mentality, boy, if I just really train hard and eat all the right food, and I think you should do that. Because I think you feel better and all the rest of it, but there's nothing to say that that's going to guarantee you anything. I mean, look at Lance Armstrong, for heaven's sakes. You know who I'm talking about, Lance? Yeah. And, he went through all that cancer stuff, and he was a healthy specimen. And I mean, you can just go down all sorts of different athletes that are just really well-tuned bodies, and diseases come upon them. See? And we just find ourselves sometimes, and we just recognize, boy, I am out of control. Maybe that you're going through a failed marriage. And if this has happened to me once, friends, it has happened to me 100 times. When I sat across the desk from a believer and they just start weeping. And they go, my spouse left me. And I mean to tell you, that is one of the most empty, difficult situations that anybody can face, because at that point you recognize there's nothing in the world that you can do to really influence that person back, because they have a free will. And they just recognize they're out of control. I don't have control over this person. There's nothing I can do to bring them back. How many parents we have in here? How many of you had the disillusionment stage come to your life when you raised kids and thought you were in control? Almost every hand goes up, It's just one of those things. As a matter of fact, I'm telling stories now at 54 years old, and my mother's eyes get real big and said, when did you do that? And it's just one of those things that goes on in our lives, that we begin to recognize that we're out of control, and there's something that's coming into our lives that we just don't have any control over. Now, let me tell you why I think that God does this, first of all, to bring us to a place of understanding that we really don't have control as to where He's actually going to take us and how He's going to actually perform what He said He's going to do. And that's, for one word, I think that Joseph learned humility. How humble did he become at that point? And I thought I was going to be a great leader. And yet, because of our limited vision and we don't see what God is doing, it's exactly the place where God was taking him. So a season of the heart, when we're in winter, and a characteristic that comes out of that is humility. You find out that you're really being humbled because you really don't have control over situations that you thought you had control. And it's really difficult for we control freaks to find out that people really have a free will and they're going to do what they're going to do. And it doesn't matter the amount of counseling, teaching, or authority or anything else you have in someone else's life. It's going to happen. And here's the final thought on this particular point. We cannot engineer ourselves out of this particular point. You're just going to find yourself in situations when you are out of control. And it really becomes a trust factor at that point. Okay, God, you showed me. And so I'm just going to put it in your hands. And at that point, I think that there's a real relaxation when you really, and maybe I ought to simplify that by saying this. When you really place trust in God's hand about a situation that you're out of control in, what usually happens after that as an aftermath, as you have really placed trust, is that all anxiety is gone. You find peace. See? Okay, I'm not in control. And actually, I think at that point you start fighting against God. Say, okay, God, we're in. We're on. Number 2 is this. During winter, we are tempted to isolate ourselves. This is a good one. I noticed there were no amens on that one, but I thought that was a really good point. During winter, we are tempted to isolate ourselves. Verse 22, don't shed any blood. Throw him into a cistern here in the desert, but don't lay a hand on him. Now, I want you to understand this, that at this point, it was not a choice of Joseph to be put in the cistern, but nonetheless, he is isolated. Which really does bring up a really interesting point for we people that are not throwing into a cistern. Why do we remain isolated? Why do we stay away from friendships? You and I were created for relationship. One of the reasons why people are so miserable in their lives is because they are not engaged in any kind of relationship outside of their own family, and sometimes not even in their own family. And there's this fear factor of getting into community. There's a reason why people want to isolate themselves. And really, when you want to isolate yourself the most is the time that you need community the most. See, when you're going through a really difficult time, the last thing you want to look at is somebody else that really knows you. And that's why it's so difficult for people to become a part of a small group and really allow themselves to be transparent and say, hey, this is what's going on in my life. Because you know what happens to us when we walk into a group like that? They discern, you're not the same. Something's wrong. What's up? And when you're in the winter seasons of your heart, you do not want to answer those kind of questions, but that's exactly what you need to do. See? Not give in to what your feelings are, but to do what is right. Now, I've got to read this part, and when I'm going to talk about depression here. And I just want you to know, I understand that people deal with depression. I understand that in a church this size, there's probably lots of people that deal with depression. And my heart goes out to you. And I know that there are biological reasons why people have depressions in their life, friends. But I want to give you a really simple understanding of what depression, and this is to a great extent to oversimplify it. There are 2 types of depressions. Bipolar, which people experience the real highs and the real lows. You know? Now I know this is simple and it's not detailed, but anyway, I want you to understand at least these 2 different areas of depression. Second, there's the reactive type of depression where individuals just experience the lows. Now, I'm talking about the winter seasons of the month, and if you have a bipolar situation where you're going up and down and you're being treated by medication, I understand that winter is going to be around for a while. I understand that. But the idea of it is that when we're talking about most people do not deal with bipolar, we're talking about people that go through depression in their life, deal with this second type, and it's called reactive. So bipolar people who suffer from bipolar depression usually have a biological reason for the disease, but the reactive type of depression usually is caused by circumstances, environment, upbringing, and so on. So, I want you to understand this particular point. Why, when we're going through the seasons of our heart, and the winter of our heart, we should not isolate ourselves. Guess which group tests the best when it comes to reactive depression in the whole population of the United States? What group of people, and if you were here last week, you already know the answer, what group of people do the best? You know who it is? The Amish. You know why? Because they're in community. You know, they don't have a choice whether they're going to eat with everybody. You know, they don't have a choice whether they're going to raise the barn. They don't have a choice whether they're going to drive their buggy or not. See? It's all about community. It's all about slowing their life down. And compared to the rest of the population, they have as much bipolar depression as anybody else. But when it comes to reactive depression, they don't have near the amount. That's what is in the general population of the United States. And that drives me to this particular theory, is that one of the reasons why I think there's a lot of people that are being diagnosed with depression right now is simply because they were made for relationship. They go through the winter of their hearts, and instead of engaging in community, they disengage. Instead of having, and by the way, one another ministries, there's 66 one another ministries in the Bible. Love one another, pray for one another. You know what one of them is? Encourage one another. See? And just hanging around with people. Just realize that there's something that's dynamic that begins to take place in your life because you're not isolating yourself from the rest of the world. Number 3 is this. Too often we live in denial that winter will actually arrive. Too often we live in denial that winter will actually arrive. Verse 23. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the richly ornamented robe he was wearing. Joseph, now friends, I love Joseph. But I want you to know at this point in Joseph's life, he did not get how bad his brothers hated him. And it's like, I'm bringing really good things into their life, and he had no idea that they were plotting. I mean, this guy is in denial. Or he's just, not getting it. And you can form any words you want to around that. But anyhow, he's in denial. Now listen to this. Nature teaches us that most of the animal kingdom prepares itself for winter. They get an idea that seasons are beginning to change. Fall is on the radar. And we're talking about, animate objects. And listen to this. Bears eat enormous amounts of food. They even have a name for it. I forget what it is, but they go into this stage and they just eat enormous amounts of calories. Doesn't that sound like fun? Squirrels gather nuts. Birds with any brains head south for the winter. The only species that doesn't prepare for winter are human beings. This is not going to happen to me. Whistling in the dark. Not going to believe it's going to be. And to prove my point, when there is a really good snowstorm here in Grand Junction, you try and buy a snow blower or a snow shovel somewhere. And the reason why is people they don't believe it's going to actually happen. It's going to actually come to them. I want you to know the truth. And friends, I want you to hear this just as a friend, not even as a pastor, just as a friend. Sometimes I think we overuse that word anyway, pastor. But here's what I want you to hear. Winter is going to come to your life. And the question is, how are you preparing for it? How are you actually developing tools and equipment around you to say, I know this is coming and this is how I'm going to get through? And the Bible talks about a wise man is a person who prepares for those times. As a matter of fact, even while I'm talking to you about it, some of you are starting to see fall colors, and you know what comes behind fall. What are you doing to prepare yourself? As a matter of fact, let me take it another step further. Lots of times, the winter months are the most difficult months for people to go through, physically speaking. They just, it's like the short days and the cold and all the rest of it is just almost too much for them. And the question comes to your mind this morning, hopefully by me, is what are you doing to prepare for that? And if you're preparing for it physically, then the question comes, why aren't we preparing for it spiritually? Why aren't we doing that? Number 4 is this. It's important to learn how to mourn during winter. It's important to learn how to mourn during winter. Listen to this in verse 34. Then Jacob, now this is Joseph's father, tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned his son many days. Jacob mourned. There's nothing else to do but mourn with news like he has just received. I mean, what would you do? Some of you have received that kind of news. And you just automatically go into mourning. One thing I've found about mourning is you never can tell somebody how long it's going to be. There's times when, a person can be gone for a long time. And you just hit a moment of grief or mourning as you think about them. One of the most misunderstood scriptures, in my opinion, has to be in Romans when Paul says, mourn with those that mourn. I mean, and he doesn't describe it any more than that. Mourn with those that mourn. He doesn't say come in and encourage them. He doesn't say take them out to lunch. He doesn't say take them shopping. He doesn't say give them teaching tapes. He says mourn with those that mourn. And you know why it's so difficult for me to mourn with people? Because it's painful. It's painful to be around people that are in mourning. And you know what most people want when they're in mourning? They don't want counsel. They just want to know that you're there. It's one of the most amazing phenomena I've ever learned in the ministry is that when people are really in mourning and you just go in and sit with them, lots of times they just say, it's just so good you're here. That's all they say. It's just so good you're here. You see, and you just allow people to go through this mourning. And the Bible really kind of speaks of this. Now, talk about Job here. How many of you have ever read Job? The book of Job. He's gone through a real winter. I mean, the first chapter of that book just overwhelms me, what happens to this man, and it's just overwhelming. He loses his family, loses everything he has, and sickness comes upon him, and he's sitting on ashes with boils all over his body, and his wife doesn't exactly mourn with him, comes up and says, and this is real encouragement, curse God and die. And besides that, your breath stinks. I mean, you read that. It's just amazing. I mean, there's just absolutely no compassion at all. Now, he's got some friends that seen from a real distance, and they look at his plight and what's going on, and they tear their clothes to throw dust in the hair on their head, which means it's a sign of mourning, and they start crying, and they walk all the way up to Joseph, and then they sit down, and then the Bible describes something that's just absolutely amazing to me. They sit down with their friend Job for 7 days and 7 nights, and they do not say a word. Not a word. They're just there in mourning with him. I'll tell you exactly what I do. And so, if you're in that situation, I come in, you have my permission to say, I heard a message where you said you wouldn't do that, so please be quiet. And here's what I do. Lots of times I go in, put on my encouraging robe, and I want to encourage people, and the reason I want to encourage people is because I don't want to stay in the place that's pain for me. For me. Not for them, for me. But I have some really good news. Are you ready for some good news? There's a song that we used to sing in Youth with a Mission. And it's right out of Isaiah 51:11. And I would love to sing this song to you, but I would kill the church. And I'm really about wanting to bring life, to the church. But listen to this and what the Lord says. And this is about the people Judah, that God had sent into exile. And now he's going to bring them back. And this is a prophecy about them. And you talk about winter. There are about 70 years of winter that these people went through. Listen to this, what Isaiah says. And this is a word for some of you this morning that are in the winter of your heart. Listen to this. Therefore the redeemed, those that know God, of the Lord, shall return and come with singing unto Zion. They're coming out of Babylon. They're coming back to their roots, and said they're going to come back to Zion. Now get this. And everlasting joy. Not just a little bit, but everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain gladness and joy. And now here's what I really want you to hear. And sorrow and mourning shall flee away. See, winter's going to come to an end. See, which is my point number 5. Be assured that eventually winter will come to an end. Be assured that eventually winter will come to an end. Listen to this in verse 35. And all his sons and daughters, now they're speaking of Jacob here, came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. Now notice this. And he said, in mourning will I go down to the grave to my son. Now get a hold of what Jacob is saying. This is what's going to be for the rest of my life. I'm going to be in mourning for the rest of my life. The only problem with that, it's not true. The information he had was actually a lie, which really does point out something that all of us really need to get a hold of. The enemy of our well-being, the enemy of our heart, the enemy of your purposes, the enemy of my purposes will whisper to you and say to your heart, it will never, ever change. And that is a sign of hopelessness, friends. That is not the God that we serve, you see. Things are going to come in to your life, and it's going to be difficult. And winter are dark months. It seems that all hope is gone and only days of suffering will last for the rest of our days here on this planet. But actually, when we come out of winter, and here's something that I want you to think about, when we actually come out of winter, there is a greater capacity, not only understanding of who God is, but who our fellow friends are, and who the people we serve are, and what the reasons we're on the planet. And here's the reason why I say this. Easy times, at least in my life, have never been a time that God has ever changed me. Man, and I wished it was that way. You don't know how much I wished it was that way. And you know what? I can say that for you too. Some of you are in crisis in your life, and it could be your finest hour. It could be your greatest hour. It could be your greatest time that God could ever do anything in your life. Is not to deny it, but to actually accept it and say, okay, God, it's winter. Something's going on in my life. I don't exactly agree with it, but it's during those painful moments. And friend, pain is a wonderful tool that God uses to change us. And most of us, when we get through the winter months, appreciate the pain. As a matter of fact, I can tell you stories of friends that I have. One that comes to mind right now is a personal friend of mine that has gone through a stroke. Suffered terribly from it. And he looked at me with all honesty in his heart and said, I would do it again for what it's brought into my life. Wow. See, and I just have to stand back and go, wow. And you know what else I find out about, these moments that God takes us through in winter? Nobody signs up for them. There's not a line that says suffering, sign up. Nobody does that. Nobody, if there's a sign out there in the lobby that says, all of you that are wanting a crisis in your life, please sign up here. There will be no line. But God loves us so much, and friends, I want you to think about this one because it's really true. All of us that are parents would do anything in our life to save our kids from any kind of suffering. But God doesn't. And I would suggest to you thinking this morning that God is a lot better parent than any of us. And he allows us to go through really painful times in our life because he wants to make adjustments. And here's something else that I learned just yesterday that I think is just so prophetic to my own life, is that when crisis comes to your life and there's a real peak of problems in your life, problems actually become the scenario that God uses to take you to the next place he has for you. It's up to you how you're going to deal with the problem. See, how are you going to go through that problem? Listen to this. Now here's a word from the Lord. Psalms 35. Weeping may remain for the night, but rejoicing comes in the morning. Now, that's a word for some of you here. You're going to go through a thawing effect. Spring's coming. You want to be here next week to listen about spring. Spring is coming. Now, the only season that man celebrates that it's going to come to an end, as far as I know, is winter. And it's on February 2nd. And what is that? Groundhog Day. We take a varmint out of the ground, see if he can see his shadow, and then actually people become enlightened and brightened in their eyes because they think that there's only 6 weeks of winter left. I want to say to you, friends, that is certifiably nuts. And yet people will believe that. Now, why am I saying that? It's because if you believe in that thing that comes out of the ground in Pennsylvania, that groundhog, why wouldn't you believe the word of the Lord that says, and mourning and sorrow shall flee away? God has never lied to anyone. And he says, your winter is coming to an end. It will be over. Believe the word of the Lord. Let's stand together. Let's pray. Lord, I just pray right now that what we've just spoken to people's hearts would manifest itself as your presence comes and signifies in their own heart and their own spirit that in your time you're going to bring winter to an end. And during that time, Lord, we're just going to say, we're going to trust you. Knowing that you're doing something that we don't see, that you're probably putting roots down in you and other people and what you're doing in our life in ways that we just don't understand. But we say to you, Lord, we're going to trust you. We're going to worship the Lord. And I say this every week, but I really mean it. You know, if you felt like you were impressed, something deeply got a hold of you, I want you to do business with God about that. I want you to say, God, I'm bringing this thing to you, and I'm dealing with, if it's depression, I'm dealing with whatever it might be with, but I'm trusting you, and I want you to talk to God. Talk to God as we worship the Lord. Worship the Lord and do business with him.